Wednesdays from 2 to 3 on WPFW 89.3 or online at WPFW.org.
Good afternoon and welcome to a very special episode of Shay Wanana. I am your co-host Samir.
And I am Shireen and happy to be here.
And we are longtime friends of the show. We work with peacevigil.net, an organization dedicated to peace education in India, South Africa, and the USA. We live in Johannesburg, South Africa, and will be in the US for the next few weeks doing trainings and workshops. We'd like to focus on the content of our show today, which will really be the focus of the rise of a supremacist culture in India, which arises from a Hindutva philosophy, and what we can learn about hate and how to counter hate from the Indian example.
Today, we'll begin the program with a story, and here it is. Imagine that it's a rainy night near your home in Rajasthan, India. Rajasthan is a desert. Rains are always welcome. But the rains are less welcome tonight because they have delayed you. Instead of walking home with a large group, it is now just you and a friend walking your cattle from the grounds where they graze during the day back to your village. The rains have made you late, and when you are late, you are nervous. Your nervousness is also making your 2 dairy cows anxious. Through the rain, you see the headlights of a motorcycle. Make it 2. And your friend, make it 2. You and your friend look at each other, then try to speed up the 2 cows you're taking home. The motorcycles are now right next to you. So close, almost touching you, so that you have to slow down, while you continue to walk as steadily as you can. "Oh, you! What are you doing?" comes a sharp voice from one of the motorcyclists. You quickly look at the driver and see that he's wearing a saffron scarf. A saffron scarf. That means there is no right answer to his question. So instead of answering, you put your heads down and try to walk faster. "Where do you think you are going, you filthy cow killer?" asks the driver of the other motorcycle. He's already hopped off his bike and is moving quickly towards you. He appears to have a long stick in his hands. He's not old enough to need it as a walking stick. Not being an idiot, you run. You run as fast as you can. Right into a third man that you didn't see. "What is your name?" the third one asks. You don't have time to think of a false name, so you tell them your real one. A mistake. This one also has a walking stick, and without any further questions, he starts to beat you with it. You look for your friend, but he seems to have run in the opposite direction to save his own life. Now the other 2 have joined the fray, and they seem to be calling for backup. You can't tell if the liquid on your face is blood or rainwater. Now through the ringing in your ears, nor through the ringing in your ears can you tell who your attackers have phoned. More people in their gang or the police. Maybe both. The beatings continue. Eventually you pass out. Many hours later, a doctor will declare you dead on arrival at a police station. This story, surreal as it may sound, is true. It is exactly what happened to Rakbar Khan near the village of Ramgarh in Rajasthan, India. He was lynched. His crime, according to his killers, was that they believed he was involved in the beef trade. And though the specifics vary, similar incidents have been taking place around India, the largest democracy of the world. According to the website lynchfactchecker.in, over 340 people have been attacked, resulting in over 50 deaths since the election of the ultra-nationalist BJP government in 2014. Though ostensibly the crime that these people are being lynched for is related to selling or eating beef, everyone knows their real crime. They are Muslims or they are Dalits. Dalits meaning the lowest caste in Hinduism. They were formerly referred to as untouchables. Their attackers are generally high caste Hindus.
What's happening in India has been described by many analysts as neo-fascism. Indian neo-fascism has unique characteristics, but it bears strong similarities to other forms of neo-fascism. We've seen it pop up in countries like Brazil, the Philippines, sometimes in Europe, and even right here in the US. Before we talk about what all these forms of neo-fascism have in common with one another, let's delve into what is it about Indian neo-fascism that makes it unique. And I think when we talk about that, we're going to have to talk about this word caste. Shirin, can you tell us a bit about what the caste system means in the Indian context?
Yes, absolutely. I think most people don't understand it because it is so complex. But in a simple way, to explain it is that it is class hierarchy. It's a hierarchy in society where everybody has been assigned a place and you can't change that place. You're born with it. People on the top, meaning the high castes, control all the resources. They are also in positions of power. They are the ones who make decisions for the whole society. The lower castes are there to take orders, so they are pretty much your slaves. The Dalits are the lowest in this hierarchy. They were in the past called untouchables. Their job is to clean toilets, to clean the drains, to dispose of the dead cattle, and so on. Now, Samir, the most important thing in all this is that this structure of hierarchy is considered God ordained. So if you are born in upper caste, your children and grandchildren will be the upper castes, and your function in society will be that of the decision maker, ruler, and so on. If you are born a low caste, you and your progeny will remain low caste, and their function in society will be to take orders. Anyone breaking this system will be going against the will of God. So what's important to realize here is that yes, it is a form of apartheid. It is a form of slavery. But now all this is ordained by God. You know, you are saying that your religion, your God has ordained that this hierarchy stays, which means anyone who breaks this system is against the will of God.
I thought this was made illegal in India over the sometime recently.
Yes, actually, it has been illegal in India for many decades. The Indian constitution clearly states that untouchability is illegal. Many of these things in the caste system are illegal under the Indian constitution, but in practice it is there, especially in the small towns and villages. The story you heard at the beginning of the show is from Rajasthan, and in Rajasthan there are several places where caste system is still rampant.
And where do Muslims and other minorities come into this story?
Yes, important question, because the character in our story was also a Muslim. I would like to give a little bit of history of Muslims and Christians in India. Muslims and Christians come into the story because most of them are descendants of people who, in order to end their suffering in the caste hierarchy, converted to Islam and Christianity. They were obviously the low castes, many were Dalits. Also, large groups of Dalits converted to Buddhism, to the Buddhist faith. They had their own interpretation of Buddhism. In 1956, almost 500,000 Dalits converted to Buddhism, led by their most important leader to date, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who also was the main architect of the Indian Constitution. So he made sure that the Indian Constitution is very anti-caste and anti-untouchability. For those in the upper castes who believe that they have the God-given right to rule over the lower castes and treat them as their slaves, this was the ultimate crime. The conversion to another religion was the ultimate crime. How can a slave just leave? How can a slave decide what to do with himself? And again, a reminder that this system is supposed to be the will of God. So all those who converted to other religions to escape the tyranny of the caste system are hated by those in the upper caste who want to maintain the control. And therefore, they want to punish the Muslims and Christians that fall in this category, because for them, they are the rebels. They are to be made subordinate again.
I see. So despite efforts to do away with the system legally, it still is a very strong part of the culture. That explains why we're seeing this, but it doesn't really explain why are we seeing so much of it increase in recent years. What's happened recently that we see much more of this kind of violence than we used to see?
Yeah, the thing is that like any other horrible thing in the world, for instance, racism, the caste system, which also, by the way, has been alluded to by many researchers as a form of racism. People even tried to go to the UN and declare it racism. But anyway, the thing is that like all horrible things in the world, we can control them to some extent, in fact, to a large extent in many cases, by good laws. And we do have good laws in India. So it's not that the violence didn't exist before, but it was controlled, the law was stringent and it was executed properly. But what has happened since 2014 is that we have a government in power which directly comes from a philosophy. So the political party in power directly aligns itself with a philosophy called Hindutva, which is a right-wing Hindu supremacist philosophy. What they believe in is that the caste system should stay in place. And secondly, that anybody who's not a Hindu should not be a part of India. And therefore, we have seen an increase in the number of cases since 2014, as there is a general environment of hate. The government promotes it. The government does nothing to punish the people who are behind these lynchings. I think you can draw a parallel with the United States. It's not like hate crimes don't happen or haven't happened in the past. But because there is somebody in control today who condones it, it maybe not
that's
directly. Yeah, that's the point. That the people who are in power, if they condone something or they keep quiet, which is also a form of condoning, the crimes increase. There's a general sense of impunity. So this is the case in India too.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean,
but let me just say one thing, that it's also important to link it with the larger world. I'm sure you'd like to tell the viewers how this high caste exceptionalism is something that the Nazi Germany borrowed from India.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, we can delve into that history. But for me, the most interesting thing about that history is that it was both ways. So on the one hand, you have the caste system, especially. There was a big deal when some of these Hindu texts were translated into German in the late 19th century. In fact, some people say that was when the Nazi sort of movement started. One of the famous Nazi ideologues, Heinrich Himmler, is said to have kept a copy of a Hindu scripture in his pocket.
My God, really?
Yeah. So very much, they use the word Aryan. We think, growing up in the U.S., I thought that the word Aryan it had nothing to do with India. I thought it was about, white supremacy and blonde hair, blue eyes, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But actually, it refers to the Aryan invasion of India, which supposedly happened thousands of years ago. Actually, that's more complicated. We now believe that didn't exactly happen the way that it's taught in Indian school books. But anyway, when the Nazis actually started a campaign of ethnic cleansing, they were praised by leaders of the Hindu right. So M.S. Golwalkar, who to this day is seen as one of the most important ideologues of the Hindutva right-wing Hindu ideology, he wrote a book called Bunch of Thoughts. And in the original edition of that book is this quote, and I want to read it word by word so that I get it right. He wrote, quote, "To keep up the purity of the nation and its culture, Germany shocked the world by her purging the country of the Semitic races, the Jews. Race pride at its highest has been manifested here."
Imagine that. I mean, both these philosophies, the Hindutva in India and fascism in Germany, supporting each other, praising each other. And as we were discussing before, there are things that are in every religion that can be used by fascists to to do whatever they want to do. So you can justify something by saying that it is religion or it is ordained by God. And the thing is, with my background in Hinduism, my personal background in Hinduism, I can give you hundreds of examples from the religious texts of the Hindus that preach humanity, that preach brotherhood, that preach unity, that preach loving one another. But somehow the fascists get hold of this one or two or three texts in a religion that is vast.
That's so true.
So Manu Smriti, for instance, is one of the texts in which caste system, all the details are given, how you're supposed to follow, and so on. And the Germans took it, or the Nazis rather took it from India.
If I can interject there,
Sure.
I think there are parallels here in the U.S. where, Christianity, if you look at the figure of Jesus, he's a pretty, I wouldn't say cuddly, but, he's all about forgiveness. But some of the Christians who are preaching about, the need for retribution, the need to defend the death penalty, for example, they don't talk about turn the other cheek. They talk about an eye for the eye, an eye for an eye.
Exactly.
So they can find in the older texts or in whatever text they want, they find the quote that backs up their prejudice.
Exactly.
And I think that's exactly what has happened here too.
Yeah, and we have talked about how these things exist in society always, but because the government keeps it in control, they don't flare up. You don't have like everyday incidents of hate against sections of society. So that is one reason, why there are flare-ups. But I also want to mention that we should not study the rise of racism or fascism or casteism in a vacuum. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are reasons why a society becomes a fertile ground for these ideas to be accepted and become the norm. And in India, it is definitely true that the economic policies that the governments have followed in the last 2 to 3 decades have led to this situation. And actually, Sami, you would be a better person to talk about it. So why don't you go ahead?
Oh, I don't know about that. We all have something to say, but let's go to the history, right? So, India in the Cold War time, so I'm talking now about the 1950s, the 1960s, India led a movement called the non-aligned movement, basically saying that you have the U.S. on one side, you have the Soviet Union on the other. They're going to fight with each other. We don't want to be any part of that. We want to do our own thing. And within that context, India tried, together with a few other countries, Indonesia, Egypt, a few other countries, they tried to chart their own course. By their own course, in the Indian context, that meant socialism. That meant a secular ethos. So secularism and socialism are both enshrined in the Indian constitution. Unfortunately, what happened was, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the Cold War ended. And in the 1990s, India was in a fairly weak position. It had invested a lot in industry, but those investments hadn't yet begun to pay dividends. Industrialization is a long-term project, so we shouldn't be surprised at that. But they had a choice, whether they wanted to continue that kind of independent socialist course, or if they were going to listen to the ideology coming at them from the World Bank, from the IMF, from the US government, from the UK government, which at that time was TINA. TINA means
there is no alternative.
100%.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
100% right. So they did that. They opened up their markets in 1994. They gutted their nascent industries. They allowed all kinds of multinational companies to come in. And they and now they're competing, of course, with China and with other places. So the result is that although India has a unique history, all countries have a unique history, Indian workers are roughly in the same position where the rest of the world is. Workers are competing with other workers for lower paying jobs. Meanwhile, the owners can move around their factories to wherever you like, and they can make workers compete with each other for lower pay. And they can also gut the environmental regulations. It's funny because if we walk around the U.S. today, I mean, we think we know what poverty is. Let me tell you, when I grew up here in Washington D.C., and I had in the 80s and 90s, I spent some time in Southeast, and I did my volunteerism, my NGOism. I walked around communities. I thought I knew what poverty was. The first time I went to India in 1999, what I saw there shocked me. It's on a whole different level, and since that time, it's gotten worse. So if we talk about the inequality, 91% of Indians have a net worth of less than 10,000 US dollars. Of the remaining 9%, so that's only the nine richest percent, 340,000 individuals are dollar millionaires. And the number of billionaires has doubled in the last 10 years. Now we have about 120 billionaires in India. These figures are from Forbes magazine, by the way.
So, but the important thing to remember is that, all this sounds grand, but to remember what you said in the beginning is that the 91% of the Indians have a net worth of less than 10,000 USD, plus most Indians live on less than $2 a day.
A lot of Indians do.
Not most, but a big majority. Yeah. Yes.
So of that 91%, let's talk. So we talked about the 9% who got everything. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the 91% who have very, very little.
Yeah.
15% of people in that category are chronically undernourished. Mm-hmm. That means they're just a little bit away, like one food shock away from perhaps dying of hunger-related illness. So that's 15% of the population. 50% of women suffer from anemia. 38% of children suffer from stunting. Stunting is an easily preventable condition. If you get enough vitamins and minerals when you're growing up, there's no chance of you getting stunting. These figures are coming from the FAO. So when you have this kind of desperation, to link it back to to the rise of neo-fascism, people become desperate, and when people become desperate, two things happen. First of all, they become very tribal, I would say. They become very stuck to their communities. When you have nothing, the only thing that's keeping you going are people like yourselves. And so sometimes the way that you can define that community is against. We are this, we are not that. We are whatever it may be, right? We call that othering, and there's been a lot written about that in philosophy, in social science, in social psychology. Of course, that happens in affluent societies. It's happening here in the U.S. when we see anti-immigrant or anti-black violence or Islamophobia. But in societies that have already been decimated, have already been devastated by hunger, by poverty, by deprivation, that goes to a whole new level. And second, and perhaps relatedly, when you're desperate, you can fall prey to a charlatan and a crank, right? When you're in hell, if someone says, I know the way out of hell, well, you're going to listen to that person, right? You don't have much of a choice. And the worst thing that happens is you get when that mixes. When some charlatan or some crank comes up and says, I can save you, but in order to save you, we got to get them. Those guys are coming for your jobs. Those guys are coming for your money. Those guys aren't like you. We got to get them. We got to move on after that.
Exactly. So, in peace education, as we use the term othering, we other the rest of the people, that are not part of your clan, or the perceived clan rather. But also that, you treat them as less than human. So you remove, any understanding of the other as human. And so it's okay to kill them, and it's okay to attack them. What strikes me about some of the changes you're talking about, in India and the domestic policies, whether it's economic or social, is that it has also changed the understanding of India as a moral force in the world. It used to be a moral force. It is now the foreign policy of India which has also changed completely. So it's not just domestic. For example, we saw a huge change in the way India interacted with West Asia in recent years, in particularly with Israel. I think it's important to talk about that as well.
No, absolutely. And that's a real tragedy. And it's hard to tell whether that's related to the whole TINA and sort of pro-US phenomenon or not. The official version of the story is that in 1994, as Shay Wanana listeners will know, we had Oslo come in to force. And the PLO, which had been outside the system entirely, was subsumed within the system a little bit through the Palestinian Authority. And India had always been close. It had been in the forefront of the international wing of the Palestinian liberation movement, I would say. The Indian government had been a staunch ally of Palestinian liberation. And they asked the Palestinian Authority, they asked the PLO, whether that was a good opportunity to normalize relations with Israel. And in their wisdom, the Palestinian Authority and Yasser Arafat said, yeah, go ahead, normalize the relations. That was sort of step one. Step two happened in 1998 when India detonated a nuclear bomb, and then soon after Pakistan detonated a nuclear bomb.
So even the detonation of nuclear bomb, even though India had the capacity and, they had arms and ammunition and, were a strong army, they were not, they didn't do this nuclear bomb thing until BJP government was in power. So it's funny that when this happened again, it was a BJP government,
100%.
the same government that's in power today, the same political party was in power then when they detonated the nuclear bomb.
That's 100%. And the funny thing, if you want to, we can spend a minute on that nuclear detonation because there really was no need. I can remember reading newspapers, Pakistani newspapers in the 1980s, which said very openly that it's an open secret that the U.S. has basically given nuclear technology to Pakistan, and in retaliation or as assurance, the Soviets have given nuclear technology to India, which makes sense in the Cold War context and makes sense from a geopolitical point of view. There was no need, given that certainly the intelligence communities of all the countries 100% knew about it, and even the newspapers were writing about it. There was no need to make those detonations, but the BJP, the right-wing Hindu government felt the need, or Hindu nationalist government felt the need to make those detonations. So when it did, India became a pariah state, and you couldn't, technically speaking, it was illegal for the U.S. to buy or sell weapons to India. Israel was the only country that was willing because they were outside of the UN framework. They were already a pariah state. So the more people that can join them in their pariah territory, the better for them. And as a result, the arms trade between the two countries increased from $200 million in the 1990s to $4.5 billion today. And India represents 49% of the global market for Israeli weapons.
I mean, that is crazy. If you think about it, that's half of what Israel is producing to sell. India is buying half of that military stuff, from Israel. I mean, that is huge. It was unthinkable even 25 years ago. India was firmly aligned with the Palestinian people, just as it was firmly aligned with people fighting apartheid in South Africa, just as it was firmly aligned with people fighting slavery, or not slavery, I mean, discrimination here in the United States. So if you remember, Martin Luther King, has talked a lot about, Dr. Martin Luther King has talked a lot about similarities with the non-cooperation movement in India, Gandhi's non-cooperation movement.
And there are very famous pictures of Dr. King leading rallies with the Congress hat, that sort of white, almost triangle-shaped kind of, it became known as a Nehru cap at one point.
Exactly.
But Dr. King would lead rallies wearing that hat in solidarity with the Indian movement.
Yes. And one thing I want to mention here, you said something about how there are, like Israel, it doesn't really care about international treaties and things. And I find that that's another way to look at why people are friends. So the present day Indian regime is great friends with Israel also because of this reason. They really don't care about any laws, any treaties. They don't care about the Indian constitution. And which is what we are seeing in a part of India called Kashmir. It has been in the news lately. It had a special status within India. It had more autonomy than other states. And the Indian government just went ahead and got rid of that status overnight without consulting anybody in the parliament. They have taken an autocratic decision, just like many people we know in history, who have done it, who don't really care about any democratic processes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the story of Kashmir is complicated, and it goes back to 1846.
Yes, that's correct.
When the colonial British East India Company sold the entire region of Kashmir to a Hindu man, Maharaja Gulab Singh, who deemed, I think he was a very small king, but then suddenly he became the king of the entire region. When partition happened in 1947, so this is when India and Pakistan were divided by the British, the Kashmiri king didn't want to join either side. So he wanted to stay neutral, and as a few other places did. But when Pakistani militias attacked Kashmir, he had no choice but to ask India for help. It should be remembered that the Kashmiri independence movement had its own aspect. It had its own flavors. it didn't necessarily align with the Congress Party until much later, until 1965. They had a party called the National Conference, headed by Sheikh Abdullah. It had been agitating that Kashmir join India, and that Kashmir, it had been and that the Maharaja should leave Kashmir. So their movement was called the Quit Kashmir movement. They wanted the king to leave. So Article 370 was kind of a fudge, I could say, that they wanted. The question about what would ultimately happen with Kashmir was supposed to be resolved by a plebiscite, was supposed to be resolved by a vote. That was a United Nations recommendation that has yet to be implemented. But until such a vote could happen, the idea was that you put in a provision to give Kashmir some an extra level of independence, an extra level of autonomy. And some Kashmiri leaders have used this Article 370 for good. Kashmir has very good land reform policies, above and beyond what's been possible in other Indian states. And those who argue that this was only a temporary provision, they may be right. But what has happened right now in the past few weeks, with the center arresting so many Kashmiri leaders right around the Eid holidays, I should say, which doesn't leave a good taste in the mouth. So Eid is one of the main Muslim festivals. So it's arrested all the leaders. It's just deployed the army. The army, by the way, has been in the Kashmir Valley since 1990. This sets a very dangerous precedent. It may be seen, especially given that this government is seen as a Hindu nationalist government, it may be seen as a Hindu occupation of Muslim territory. And it's very reminiscent of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and it can lead to increased violence for generations.
Which, by the way, is probably what they want, because divide and rule is always great, for fascists. And they have proposed they're going to split the state into three. So there will be Kashmir, Jammu, and Ladakh. So Kashmir will be the Muslims, the Jammu area will be for Hindus, and Ladakh will be for the Buddhists. And I feel that really India is going backwards in time. So, in 1947, when India got independence, it said that it's a secular state, everyone is welcome to live there, and Pakistan, on the other hand, decided they're going to have a state where religious demographics will decide, who's going to stay and so on.
100%.
Yeah, but India seems to have gone backwards, and it's only going to lead to more reaction and more terrorism, unfortunately.
No, that's completely right, and we don't want to go backwards, we want to go forwards, and the only way we can go forwards, ladies and gentlemen, is by supporting listener-supported radio here at WPFW. We are still in our August pledge drive. I know that there are people still in DC. I know there are people listening to my voice, and I would like you, if you're listening to my voice, to go ahead and call 202-588-9739 or 1-800-222-9739. We have Toni Morrison has recently passed away. We also have an MP3 and CD set, a 2-hour special of Toni Morrison.
Only at $89
and 30 cents.
And 30 cents.
That's
yes.
right. So that's that magic amount. $89.30 gets you the Toni Morrison CD.
Fabulous deal.
We're still giving away those Sweet Honey in the Rock tickets. That's $100. We'll get you a ticket to Sweet Honey in the Rock.
And for more details, you can also go to our website, wpfwfm.org. Try going there and, see what all is available and what you can do and how you can help. Without your support, friends, we cannot move forward. We are one of the very few stations that actually bring to you information and analysis that matters in people's everyday lives. We are not selling, stuff. We are actually sharing ideas and analysis. So please do support us. Without your support, we cannot go forward.
And just a reminder of who you're listening to. We are Shireen and Samir from peacevigil.net. We are based usually in South Africa. We have produced a number of shows for our friend Zainul Amin, who is the usual host here. Those of you who are missing Zain's voice, go ahead, give us a call and let us know that you want to hear him and you want to hear us. Shay Wanana is the only show that can bring you this kind of content. We're doing an entire hour on the rise of the Hindu right and the situation in Kashmir today. How many other places can you hear that on in today's radio.
Definitely not in India, Samir, because they have closed down the media in Kashmir. I mean, you can't even access the internet. You can't send any WhatsApp messages, no social media there. Plus, the Indian media, unfortunately, has become a complete tool in the hands of the Indian government. There are very few people. Yeah. I would like to mention a journalist. His name is Ravish Kumar. He has just gotten the Magsaysay Award for his journalism. Magsaysay Award is an award that is considered an alternative Nobel Peace Prize for Asia, and he's got that for his brave journalism efforts. But otherwise, in India, journalism has really gone downhill. The Prime Minister never talks to journalists, never gives interviews, and the interviews that he does give are all already scripted. And that's what happened in Nazi Germany. You know, all kind of criticism was curtailed.
Now, the media here and the media there have a lot of similarities, and I've seen the Americanization of the Indian media. And with that, Shirin, can I ask you, because you've been a peace activist in this space for a long time, can you tell me what's been going on? Like, how do you if we look at what's going on in Kashmir, we can just say this is part of human history. You have the strong dominating the weak, and you have revenge killings and revenge killings after that. You have a cycle of violence that never ends. What is your take as a peace educator who's been working in many countries for many years? What is your take on how to stop that?
It is important to realize that none of us are not important. We are all very important in this world. We can all make a difference. So that's where I'd like to begin. And as a peace educator, I think that one of the biggest mistakes we make as human beings is thinking that the leaders will do their jobs and we'll be fine. Leaders often don't do their jobs. So the first thing we must do is to lobby our governments very strongly and use your privilege. So if you are a high caste Hindu in India or even abroad, the Indian diaspora is pretty big abroad, push, lobby, do something. Call and say that what is happening in India is not right. You do not agree. You do not want the Dalits to be lynched. You do not want the Muslims to be arrested.
And I believe an opportunity is coming up because I believe the Prime Minister is coming here in a few weeks.
He is, and you must, even whether you are a supporter of 370, the Article 370 or not, that is besides the point. The point here is that do we still want democratic institutions in India? Do we want a country where everybody can live in peace, or we want a supremacist ideology to prevail? So please do use your privilege. If you are a person of Indian origin living abroad, you have more privileges than most Indians have in India, because it is almost like martial art. It's almost like martial law there in certain parts. People really cannot speak up. So do that. Please use your privilege. Lobby, the decision makers wherever you are. The second thing, which is a more difficult thing, and it is a long-term thing, is to work on a culture of peace. And by that, I don't mean to just go, when there's a religious festival, you go and you wish your neighbor Merry Christmas or Eid Mubarak or Happy Diwali. No, it has to go beyond that, which means that in your workplaces, in your schools, at your dining table, on the WhatsApp groups with families and friends, you must insist that you believe in a culture of diversity, not tolerance. Tolerance, as Gandhi said, is a bad word. Don't use tolerance. Use celebration. Celebrate diversity. We are not doing anybody a favor by letting them exist. No, existence is their right. They are here on this planet just like you. And, diversity is beautiful. It must be celebrated. So one example I was giving, recently at the University of Maryland where I was teaching, I said to people, we were discussing Indian food, and I said, two big ingredients that we use in our cooking are onions and tomatoes. And both of them do not originate in Asia. We didn't even have them a few centuries ago.
I think you might be thinking of potatoes and tomatoes.
Sorry. Potatoes and tomatoes. Yes, sorry. Not onions. See, obviously I don't cook. You can... No, but tomatoes and potatoes. You're right. No, chili. Yes, now I remember. It was chilies and tomatoes. So both of them are very important in Indian cooking, and both these ingredients come from the Americas. They come from South America. So it's there are things that we learn about even our own culture which we think is perhaps there forever. We were just born great. When God made humanity. But it's not true. We have borrowed from other people.
100%.
They have borrowed from us. So, little things like that. Similarly, if your child makes friends with somebody, do not ask them, okay, so like, is he black or is he white? Is he Hindu or is he Muslim? That's something I've learned in South Africa, which really is a rainbow nation, in a beautiful way. Despite the problems there, we do not refer to a classmate as she's black or she's white. We take names. We humanize everybody. We try and understand the other person as another human being before we start talking about what religion they follow or what caste they are from. So developing that culture is important. 100%. And in that, Samir, I would also say that the importance of using mass media, the new media we have today. For example, the WhatsApp groups. Mm-hmm. You were actually talking about it the other day, how WhatsApp is being used a lot for spreading hate.
Absolutely. No, in India especially, we see that. And I'd say that I'd also ask folks to check out on our website, if you go to peacevigil.net, you'll see that the latest post we have is a video it's called Nile Waters. And it's about this issue about how, all the waters of the world are connected, just as all the peoples of the world are connected. You can do your DNA test and you'll find that there's no one who's 100% anything. And with that, Shireen, I wonder, because one of the tools that we use in our peace education is music, is dance, is song, is theater. And I wonder if we have a moment, if you can give listeners a taste of the kind of music that we do in the Indian subcontinent.
Yes, absolutely. As you know, in India, there are 30 plus official languages. And it is very important to speak in the language of the people you are talking to. You're doing the peace education in. And in the US, of course, mostly we use English and we use Spanish. But in India, we use many languages. And given the sad reality of India at the moment, which is sectarian violence, I will quickly sing this song, which goes something like this. It says, मंदिर भी ले लो, मस्जिद भी ले लो, मगर आदमी के लहू से न खेलो. मंदिर से गरजो, खुदा है नदारद, मस्जिद में गरजो, ईश्वर नहीं है तो फिर आदमी के लिए धर्म क्या है. जहाँ कत्ल करने को उठते हैं खंजर, खुदा को भी ले लो, ईश्वर भी ले लो, मगर आदमी के लहू से न खेलो. Which means that you can take God, you can take the temple, you can take the masjid, which is the mosque, you can take anything, but do not take away humanity. Do not kill the human beings.
Thanks so much, Shireen. That's great. Thanks especially to our caller from Wheaton who bought one of the Sweet Honey in the Rock tickets. Thanks so much.
Hey, that's my old neighborhood. Yay!
Thanks so much for your contribution. Guys, we are Samir and Shireen from Peace Vigil. You've been listening to Shay Wanana. Thank you very much. Remember, we're going to be at IPS 1301 Connecticut tomorrow from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. That's at the Institute for Policy Studies. Thanks to everyone.
And our website is peacevigil.net.
This is WPFW News. I'm Askia Mohammed. Here are some headlines. D.C. officials say they don't support the federal government's plan to house unaccompanied migrant children in the city. Muriel Bowser said yesterday that D.C. won't be complicit in the inhumane practice of detaining migrant children in warehouses. The detention center would have housed unaccompanied minor children from 12 to 17 and been run by Dynamic Service Solutions, a company based in nearby National Harbor, Maryland, that has no record of experience running facilities for children. Its job listings ask for people to work with unaccompanied alien children. One of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers is suing his longtime associate and accused accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, and 3 other members of his household staff in the first lawsuit of its kind since the accused serial sex trafficker died in his New York jail cell Saturday. Jennifer Arouse has accused Epstein of raping her when she was just 15 years old. She says Maxwell and the other unnamed staff members facilitated the abuse. The warden at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan has since been reassigned, and 2 guards who were tasked with monitoring Epstein were put on leave. Reports emerged yesterday that the guards may have been sleeping during their shift, failing to check for 3 hours and then falsifying time logs. Opera superstar Placido Domingo is facing allegations of sexual misconduct in the workplace from at least 9 women spanning a period of 30 years. The women say Domingo regularly harassed them and tried to pressure them into sexual relationships. A group of 22 states, 6 cities, and the District of Columbia sued the Trump administration in an attempt to block the rollback of Obama-era regulations on emissions from coal-fired power plants. The new rules were announced by the Environmental Protection Agency, and they allow states to set their own regulations for emissions and decide whether coal-fired plants should make improvements. President Obama's Clean Power Plan sought to lower carbon emissions through federal regulations, but the plan never took effect due to multiple legal challenges. San Francisco and Santa Clara counties filed a lawsuit yesterday challenging the Trump administration's plan to penalize immigrants who use or are likely to use public benefit programs such as food stamps, housing assistance, or Medicaid. The new rule would make it harder for immigrants with low incomes or low levels of education to obtain visas or green cards. Partly sunny, also for homeowners, because the value of homes in the district keeps climbing. The Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors finds that July's median